Welcome everyone to the July 16th meeting of the 2229 Main Street Advisory Task Force. We have a pretty full agenda. First thing, I do need another volunteer to take minutes. Court did a great job. You can do it again, or you could pass the torch. Rich is not, you can do that again? Thank you. Thank you very much. It's not an easy task. You do a great job. First thing, we'll call the roll. I'll go around the screen. Gary Kleiman,
Here.
Pam Hill,
Here.
Court Booth,
Here.
Carl Seidman,
Here.
David Ropeik,
Here.
and Paul Bohm. I'm here. Thank you and welcome. So we have a quorum. We have a pretty full agenda and hopefully we won't go full 2 hours, but I think I sent you a message. We might. Let us review the minutes first. So there are two sets of minutes. I did get some comments from Carl on one of the sets of minutes, which I'll show you his changes in a moment. But let's do June 18th minutes. Any comments or edits on the June 18th minutes?
I'm not sure I'm right about this, but I'm quoted as saying that the IC's plan developed by the RPs will outline owner responsibility in detail, and that ownership liability requires that the town effectively manage the ICs. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't think I can't. I'm not sure. I said we'll outline ownership responsibility in detail, and I would just if that's what I said, that's what I said. But I wouldn't expect me to say that. But
Are you on the June 18th minutes or the
yeah, June 18th. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm July 2nd. I'm on July. Oh, I'm way ahead of you. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry.
Let's finish June 18th. Any comments? Do you have a motion on the minutes?
I move we accept the minutes of June 18 as written.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, let's take a vote. Gary Kleiman,
Aye.
Pam Hill.
Yep.
Carl Seidman,
Aye.
Court Booth,
Aye.
David Ropeik,
Aye.
and Paul Baum, aye. And so the minutes of June 18th are accepted as drafted and written. So let me share my screen because Carl sent in some edits. So it's easier to look at them. Oops, here we go. Okay, so Carl had two comments, the sticky notes here. Carl made a comment that that this should read, Mr. Seidman has contacted Megan Zamuto to arrange a meeting with the health director. That was a change that he suggested. And the other change was down here at the end of institutional controls, to strike out maintain the ICs, and instead the end of the phrase, which will obligate the owner to manage uses and activities at the site to prevent disturbances of the cleanup remedies. I think he's right. The null isn't to maintain the ICs; it's to manage the site so the ICs are adhered to. A little bit different, but I think your change is better. It's clearer. So those are Carl's two changes. Pam, you had a comment where on this?
Oh, so you're on July 2nd now?
Yep,
Did we do June 18th?
we just did.
Shoot, I'm sorry. I do have a comment on June 18th, but sorry about that. Okay,
You're referring to the
Guys,
first
it's
bullet here, right?
yeah, it was the first. I'm just not sure I would have said we'll outline owner responsibility in detail. I don't think I would have said that.
It was probably paraphrased. I don't know, Court. Some way you'd like to change that so it reads more accurately?
Yeah, I just don't know. Okay, I don't know if, I wouldn't, I might not, I'm not sure I can't remember what I actually said, but I can't, I don't know if we even need that bullet in that case. I'd rather we didn't have the bullet, actually. Because I'm
Well,
not sure. But
Paul, we could strike it. The video speaks for itself, or we could simply table this and I can go back to the video.
Pam, it's your choice. We leave it, strike it, or we.
I say strike it. I'm happy if you strike it. I don't care.
I don't think it affects the substance of the minutes if we strike it. Just take it out.
Exactly. Okay. Now,
Okay.
can I just, for the record, just say in June 18th, which I was looking at the wrong stuff. If we just approve that, I do want to note that in the public hearing follow-up, I think I'm credited with saying in the second sentence, perhaps we could have listened even more and responded less in order to make clear that we are hearing all concerns. I don't think I said that. I think somebody else said it. I don't necessarily disagree with it.
I thought that was Rich. It did,
I
it
think
was
I may have
said.
said that.
Yeah, and I prefer that we, it's a good comment, but I didn't make it.
Okay, well, I don't think, the substance is. Unless
Right,
it's been
right now,
objection.
it's not attributed to you. It's in between two other statements that are attributed to you, but it's just a blank sentence with no attribution. It just says.
Yeah, but the implication is me.
Right,
You
understand.
know, that's
Okay,
definitely.
well, we voted on it, and I don't want to open that up, and I don't think that's a really harmful.
Not a big
comment.
deal, but it's in the record for our
Yeah.
recording for this.
So are the recordings, so people can go back. Nobody looks at the minutes.
I
Right,
know, yes, but
right,
Court,
okay,
you could make a note in the minutes cut today.
I will,
Okay,
that we
thank you.
discussed it, yes.
Thank you, thank you.
okay. And we will strike out this top bullet here on page 2. Okay. So I will make, any other comments on July 2nd minutes? Okay, so I will make these comments, I'll strike this, and I will.
I
Go-
move that we accept the July 2nd minutes as amended.
I second.
Okay, let's have a roll call. Pam,
Yes,
Gary,
Aye.
Carl,
Aye.
Court,
I,
David,
Aye.
and Paul Bohm. Aye. Okay, we accept the minutes as amended. I will make those changes and submit those as discussed. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next topic. So, let me take this off here. So Ariel and Nancy are with us. They're about to finish their report, and they've asked to brief the task force on the report. You have a copy of the report. It's pretty voluminous. I think for tonight, oh, I see Kurt Herman has joined us. Thank you. So make a note of that in the minutes. Hi, perfect timing. If we can spend about 30 minutes with a high-level presentation and whatever important comments you have, I think we probably should go through that in some detail and send your comments to Chris, and he will compile the comments and get those to Rue. I think if there are any really substantive comments, Chris, that I need to be involved for clarification, let me know. But if not, then just bypass me in those comments. I have provided comments on the executive summary to you, and will provide additional comments to you. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ariel and Nancy for the next 27 minutes.
Hey, Paul, do you mind if I just take a moment to make
Yeah.
a comment?
Okay, go ahead.
So I just want to take a minute to thank Rue for their work here. The town engaged them in April 2023, and they've worked hard to review and analyze decades of scientific data generated from EPA's cleanup of the Superfund site. Aside from attending the task force meetings on June 23rd, 2023 and May 28th, 2024, Rue also attended the task force's 2 public hearings on November 9th, 2023 and June 4th, 2024. and the EPA's public forum on October 23rd, 2023, and has met with town staff and staff from the EPA many times. They've worked hard to understand the community's concerns, and they've worked hard to protect the interests of the town. So thank you, Nancy, Ariel, and Katie, for partnering with us on this project. We look forward to seeing your final report next month, and we're grateful for your work.
And I will second that. I'm sure there's second, thirds, and fifths here. I should mention their schedule. So Rue's schedule, as far as I know from your email, is that they will submit a final report. The plan is on August 16th. That's the date I have, and they are requesting comments, any comments by July 30th. Is that correct, Ariel and Nancy? Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
That
So-
sounds right. I wanted to point out that Katie Boston is with us as well. She was on leave and has returned and is joining us this evening.
Good to be back. Missed you all.
Welcome back. There's been a lot of really interesting discussion. This isn't the first time we've discussed the report, but so let's begin. I don't know what you want to cover here tonight, but
Okay, so I think Ariel's going to pull up some
Yeah.
slides and
Do I have the ability to
Share.
screen share?
you should.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I actually see the little arrow this time, so it means I actually do have it. Okay. Let me know when you can see it. Nope.
Got it.
got it. Yep.
Great. So we're just going to go high level through some of the slides that you guys have already seen regarding kind of our approach, just as a quick reminder, and then very quickly kind of get into the meat of the report.
And
So-
as you go, Ariel, since we've been
Yes.
through this, if you can highlight.
Do you want me to just skip?
Well, no,
Okay.
it's your presentation. If you can highlight what changes, if anything has changed or things you really want us to focus on here, because I know there have been some revisions in some of the data you've used. But go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine. Thank you. So, we were asked what can be done with the property once remediation is complete. So to evaluate and answer this question, we looked at, what do we anticipate post-remediation conditions to be? We identified the most sensitive possible site use, which would be residential, and then we considered what reasonable maximum exposure scenarios would be. So we have a figure here that kind of shows the soil, sediment, and groundwater monitoring well locations that were included in our HHRA data set. There is a change to, as you can see on the figure, to some of the soil samples in this location that EPA was able to just discuss with us from the last presentation. It doesn't change any of the numbers, but it's just the presentation here. We looked at residential scenarios across the entire property. So that's a resident and a construction worker. And we also looked at a resident acting as a recreator in the sediment and the surface water and the peat across the property. So we looked at, we divided the site into three main areas. We have area 1A, 1B, and 2. We looked at residential use of these three areas. Area 3 is going to have the soils rendered inaccessible by an engineered barrier. That's what's known as the holding basin. And then we looked at the recreational in these three areas of wetlands or sediment. This just kind of quickly goes through the media. I'm not going to go through it. There's no changes here, but we looked at all of the different media on the property: soil, sediment, surface water, potential for indoor air, and kind of where those compounds come to be. We had a number of assumptions that are baked into the human health risk assessment. this is a wall of text. I will hit on kind of, I think, the high level important ones here. We assume that the soil and sediment that were removed from the data set was based off of data provided by EPA and their contractors. And we assume that they're going to be either removed from the site or rendered inaccessible through the cap that was discussed for Area 3. We have residual soils in the majority of Area 1B, which is where the building footprints are. There's going to be at least 10 feet below ground surface, the final ground surface, with at least 10 feet of clean fill. We assume that the compounds with remediation goals have reached those remediation goals, either on a point-by-point basis for PCBs, which is a regulatory requirement, or on an exposure point concentration or EPC basis for all the other remedial goals. So those are the levels that were established and documented in the ROD and other documents for cleanup levels. Oops. We assume that an engineered barrier cap is going to be installed for the holding basin, Area 3, that sufficiently shields radionuclide activity, prevents exposure for direct exposure for any receptor in that area. There also be institutional controls in place, that require maintenance of the cap, restricting construction worker activities as needed. Prevents the use of groundwater on the site. Groundwater and soil vapor conditions will need to be reevaluated in the future prior to any construction in those areas. And then a vapor mitigation system and associated administrative restrictions, if necessary, would be designated based off the results of that evaluation. And then we have, the surface water concentrations in Area 4 will meet the Massachusetts surface water standards following remediation activities. Currently, the understanding is that the surface water concentrations in that area as a result of the sediment, and once that sediment is remediated, we expect that the surface water concentrations will meet those standards. And then municipal water will be used for potable and non-potable purposes on the site. I'll pause. Looks like we have a couple of questions. David, do you want to go first?
Just a real quick question. So I understand what assumptions you're basing this on, but is there someplace in the report high up, and these are summary slides, but is there someplace high up that explains on what basis you make those assumptions, that there are legal requirements that the EPA meet, and WARLs and all SWARLs and all those sorts of things? Are those the basis for those assumptions, are a matter of trust from the public? So when you say you assume this, some people may say, yeah, you assume it, but what if they don't? And they have to. Are those have tos stated somewhere?
It is in the section of the report where we go through the assumptions. It talks about that there are things that should be confirmed in the future.
There's an assumption and limitations and uncertainty section.
Yes.
Okay, I'll study that up in case those questions come up. Thank you.
Yep. Gary?
Yeah, my question is about vapor mitigation. It sounds like from this, you check before you begin construction. Do the institutional controls, or are there other requirements in place that would require follow-up to make sure that, 10 years after a building is constructed, soil vapors don't build up over time, and that maybe, it accumulates in a basement 10 years post-construction?
That's built into the calculation and the process. So when you're evaluating for the potential, you're looking to consider that potential buildup and change.
Okay.
Remediation is ongoing with regards to the groundwater, and thus what will be volatilizing into the soil vapor, and that which could then go into indoor air. really only expect, given the extensive remediation planned, that soil vapor concentrations will go down over time.
Just want to be able to say that it's been considered.
Yes, it will be any proper evaluation of potential vapor intrusion will account for that.
Well, in fact, that is one of the institutional controls that, if there's construction, that EPA will do those measurements and will mitigate if there is vapor. So I guess your
The way
question
it's
is,
stated here, they do that measurement before construction. The question is, does it then follow 10 years post-construction? Is there ongoing monitoring? So
yeah, I
that,
think that's more of a Kara question than a Rue question.
okay.
But we can let's defer that. I think, how far does the institution control? What's the reach of the institutional controls as far as those measurements? But
We've assumed that there'll be a vapor mitigation system in place and that there will be ongoing monitoring and maintenance of that system.
Yes, so that is an assumption of this report. But as far as for the future, it would need to be reevaluated for the actual future conditions prior to construction.
Right. We
Does
made
this
an
mean that-
assumption that will be verified at the time or reevaluated.
I think what you're saying is an approved vapor mitigation system would have an ongoing monitoring component to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, depending on what the system may be. Yes.
okay, so given all that, are you including vapor intrusion in your calculations based on groundwater concentrations right now, independent of any mitigation?
For area 2, yes, we are
So-
including potential vapor intrusion to indoor air, not for areas 1A and 1B.
But if that's something that's going to be mitigated and the exposures are going to be eliminated, why
It's
is
not-
that? Why is that
At this
included?
point, we don't anticipate it would be necessary for area 2, which is why it's included in our calculations.
So when we say not included, we have assumed that there's no mitigation system in place in area 2 because based on the current data, we don't anticipate that it would be warranted.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas for the
Okay.
other areas, based on current data, it's anticipated that a vapor mitigation system would be required. And so we have included that mitigation system as part of our assumptions. We're assuming there's no vapor migrating into indoor air in areas 1A and 1B because there will be a system in place.
Okay, so that can be a little
Just need to
confusing
make
the
sure
reader,
that
so-
assumption is included in the institutional controls at the time of their being set. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions before we move on to the next slide?
Just a quick question. When you showed the data, the walls of the cooling pond, we had some discussion
Yes.
about, since that's going to be excavated, those shouldn't be included. What'd you end up doing with those data?
We left them as is. It is conservative to include them. They were not initially removed, or they are not designated for removal based off of their concentrations, but for slope stability and kind of the remediation process. So assuming they are actually removed from the site as planned, our resulting exposure point concentrations, in the future that will likely be lower.
So Paul, we included that as a conservative measure by assuming we included those data. We did not exclude them. If we did exclude them, it would only lower the concentration. So
yeah.
it's a conservative factor and we didn't rerun the numbers.
But there's language speaking to that in the
Yeah.
uncertainty
Yeah,
section of the report.
That's good. Just very briefly, I made a comment in the executive summary, but I didn't see sort of a separate section on conservatism, one of which you just mentioned. How are you dealing with all the very conservative assumptions? Is there a separate part of the report? I haven't gotten to that part of the report yet.
They're in
Yeah.
section 6.
Oh.
They're captured in section 6, and what we have done, we saw your comment, is in this presentation we pulled them out and captured them in a couple of slides, and
Okay.
we will be sure to highlight them in the executive summary.
Okay, it's the danger of asking preemptive questions, but go ahead. Thank you.
Oh, good. So before I go into the results, I just wanted to touch quickly on the numbers we'll be talking about. We have excess lifetime cancer risk, or ELCR. It's the probability that an individual will develop cancer over a lifetime because of exposure to a carcinogen. EPA presents an acceptable risk range, and Massachusetts risk threshold is 1 × 10⁻⁵, which is kind of in between the acceptable risk range of 1 × 10⁻⁶ to 1 × 10⁻⁴. We are utilizing the 1 × 10⁻⁵ as our threshold for this risk assessment. And cancer risk is evaluated cumulatively, so it's the sum of the risk from all the compounds, all the pathways. Hazard index, which is the non-cancer evaluation, is a ratio of the receptor's potential exposure level to an acceptable exposure level that has been calculated based off of a number of things, which Katie's going to talk to you a little bit more about later. For this, we look at hazard index, or HI, of 1 or less that indicates that that exposure is equal to or less than the acceptable level. And this is evaluated cumulatively as a sum of the hazard of all compounds as an initial screening. And then if that exceeds 1, we evaluate by the target organ, which is the sum of the hazard from compounds with the same target organ that it's expected to impact.
Just a quick question. At a separate meeting when David was going over these results, he introduced the term additive as opposed to cumulative. And we had a discussion about cumulativity versus additivity. Clearly, you're adding things up. This is probably a longer discussion for here, and maybe David, you want to take this offline, but I mean, these are clearly additive, but are they actually cumulative in terms of real risk? That's an open question in my head. It's just something to think about, because David brought that up, and I don't know, David, you want to discuss that for me? This is going to be a long discussion. I don't want to do that here, but it's just sort of an open question. What's the best descriptor? What you're actually doing here?
I don't see any need to discuss it in detail again here. No. Thank you.
Okay.
So a version of this table is included in the report. This is basically just showing, our areas, what they're used for, who the receptors are, and, the results. They're all at acceptable risk levels. None of the evaluations exceed the thresholds that are appropriate for, cancer or non-cancer.
Mary, we could probably pull the draft off of this one, right?
Technically, it's still a draft report, but the results
Okay.
aren't expected
that's
to change.
True. That's true. I'm correct.
So we pulled together a couple of slides here that are possibilities of how we can also present the results in a final report. We're still thinking of the best way to present some of this information to a lay audience. It's a very technical evaluation, and trying to distill that down. So these next couple of slides are visuals that are trying to kind of show these in a graphical form. And to be honest, we'd love feedback from you guys to kind of see if you find them helpful.
They are not yet in our report.
Yes, these
You
are
will
not
not find them
reflected in the
there.
report. These
Yeah.
are just other things to consider. So this is visualizing the cancer risk results. We have the construction worker scenario on top, the residential scenario on the bottom. We have the different range and thresholds that I discussed on the cancer The ELCR description kind of shown here visually. And it shows, our results kind of compared to those thresholds and ranges that we discussed. Yes, Carl. You're muted.
I think it would be helpful if for public presentation, you didn't use the exponential notation. That it's 1 in a million, 1 in 100,000. I think that's going to be much easier for the layperson to interpret than
Fair enough.
this notation.
And we can certainly change that in a final version. Yeah.
Well, on that point, you really don't. I mean, your scale on the bottom is exactly that. Maybe you don't even need the
numbers.
The numbers on
Yeah.
the chart.
Yeah.
Good point.
The other charts actually don't have it. I just included this in case someone had a question. I didn't know what they were off the top of my head.
If I may interject,
Yes.
from a communication standpoint, the previous slide says all you need to say. If you choose in the end to include something like this, I would second what Carl said about exponentials into real numbers, if you will. Are you still with me? I just got a
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry. I got a cue that said, look like I'm done talking. Maybe it's my computer reminding me to shut up finally. But the red line, the 1 in 100,000, I would go out of my way to designate as the threshold beyond which you exceed that the 1 in, 1 to 0.5, the state level.
That's captured in the notes there. We could certainly.
I would highlight that.
Stress that.
Right, so that if people see these big blue bars, I'm thinking affectively now, they see that they don't cross the red line and they know what the red line means more clearly.
Yeah.
I mean, the other question is it even helpful to you? I mean, to your point, David.
Personally, the previous 2 slides sum up what people are going to want to know adequately, in my opinion. This one is superfluous, in my opinion. It'll be in the report somewhere. You're talking about the summary sort of presentation documents to the public?
I mean, we're talking about the report. I think how you utilize pieces of the report is up to you.
Right. Okay. Well, including it is in that case, I think a level of detail that is ultimately reassuring if you understand it. And I think that red threshold line is the danger line, simply put, and making more clear what that means, that none of those blue bars exceed the safety or acceptable level threshold would make this visual more informative.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think this is helpful because elsewhere in the report, the reader is going to find numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wherever they find it. So I think this is a summary of, those numbers. I think rather than ignore the numbers, I put on the scale. I'm not sure you need the entire y-axis on here. But,
and the reason that is on there is because.
Excuse me, x-axis, sorry.
Yeah, that x-axis, that was, my thinking as well, Paul, when we first looked at this, but that actually does capture the upper end of EPA's acceptable risk level, which is why it's on there.
What does the upper end mean? What does the upper end mean?
They specify a range. They say it's safe anywhere between the yellow line and the purple line. Massachusetts has designated a specific threshold that sits in the middle. Well,
yes, and the range.
Rhythmically.
Yeah, the range is a site-specific kind of decision making.
Yeah, so leave that in there. Okay.
So one point of clarification, are the risks that we're looking at in those blue bars, 9 parts in a million, 8 parts in a million, are those the cumulative risk that you described on the prior slide? So that is the additive sum of all the
compounds, all the pathways, so soil for someone living on a portion of the site, and then recreating and being exposed to sediment, surface water, and peat in the rest of the site.
Okay, well, we'll have the same discussion later about the value of presenting cumulative risk in that way, but.
Okay. Can I get not 9-minute warning? Is that okay?
Then I'm going to go fast.
Okay.
So we won't go through this, but we can also present, other risk comparisons when we talk about what, odds are, what other things do have similar or less or more types of, risk. We have the hazard results. I'm going to skim through this because I actually think the conservatism is more important. If you want to talk about it, it's a similar presentation to the cancer risk. So we have the adult and then the child, looking at cumulative and the target organ analysis here, also showing that everything is acceptable. Katie, do you want to go into the conservatism?
Sure. And I think that we're going to continue to scratch our heads and expand this list because Ariel and I do human health risk assessments all the time. And I think that we've kind of become immune to some of their conservative nature, some of the conservative assumptions that are baked into them. And I do think it makes sense. I know people have commented on this, but we'll be sure to highlight elements of this that are easy to grasp in the executive summary, just to highlight how conservative the analysis is. So we've broken this out into different categories, and I'm going to move pretty quickly so that we can get through all of the various ideas we have as of right now. The first is the data set. We discussed this a little bit earlier, but including samples like those Area 2 samples in the cooling pond results in an overestimation of potential risk. Those exposure point concentrations are elevated. Those soils are going to be removed. Our approach for exposure point concentrations in general is either the 95th percent, the UCL of the mean, which is, we're 95% certain that it's the true mean. It's an inflated version of the arithmetic average, or a maximum concentration that's very conservative, and you're assuming exposure to those maximum concentrations or to that 95th UCL of the mean, every day. That's very unlikely to actually be realized. The surface water EPCs is something that I think Ariel touched on a little bit earlier, but we're assuming that those will go down over time. And also over time, some of the concentrations at the site will continue to decrease based on remediation. So our exposure point concentrations are stagnant, and that's conservative. All right, next slide, Ariel. Just baked in conservatism related to the human health risk assessment approach, this regulatory approach. The exposure factors, how much water people are drinking, how much soil they're ingesting, all those sorts of daily factors that we're assuming for contact with, material at the site are all reasonable maximum exposure values. So really, really upper end. Average exposures are most likely are going to be much less. And again, this is across multiple pathways. So, assuming exposure, for a resident, they're exposed to sediment and surface water in the cooling pond while wading and swimming. This is really conservative. We've discussed this, that's a very unlikely scenario. Same thing with the sphagnum bog, sorry, it's a tongue twister. And we're assuming exposure pathways like ingestion of soil and sediment. That's very likely an overestimation within our calculations. Toxicity values. This is kind of a text-heavy slide and is really jargony, but generally, when we're deriving a toxicity factor, which, we've these two terms when we're thinking about risk, we have how much are you exposed to, and then how toxic is that substance. So to develop how toxic is that substance number, we use reference doses for non-carcinogenic effects. And the derivation process is inherently very, very conservative. There's a number of uncertainty factors that are applied that make those toxicity factors more and more conservative. This is compound specific, but you can, apply factors up to 300. Divide the safe level of exposure by 300, make it 300 times more conservative. And that's what ultimately gets used in the risk assessment. And it's the same for reference doses, which are for ingestion, and reference concentrations, which are used for inhalation. Similarly, when we're looking at that, how toxic is something term, the toxicity factor, when we're looking at that term for carcinogenic effects, the regulatory approach is really, really conservative. It's called a no threshold approach, where we're assuming that damage is possible at every dose of exposure for that carcinogenic compound. And this is something that, is, really not supported by the science for a number of carcinogens. But it's a very conservative approach that's baked into the human health risk assessment process. We've also cherry-picked some toxicity factors, like for PCBs, for Aerochlor 1254, that more conservatively evaluate, for PCBs, Aerochlor 1254 is a toxicity factor that likely overestimates how toxic the environmental PCB mixture is. So that's a conservative assumption there. And now, if you add all of these assumptions on top of each other, you're layering conservative assumptions, right? So it's the no good, very bad day, again and again and again. And so ultimately, this is representing a scenario that will likely never be realized in the real world. But it's a very conservative regulatory approach that is prescribed by the human health risk process, and we also tried to be conservative as we approached data selection and toxicity selection, exposure assumptions for the site. Did someone have something to say? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think this is the last two slides. The derivation of the thresholds is really a very important concept. I just hope there's some easy way to explain. I would explain it that EPA and others have built in lots of safety factors into the derivation of these values. I mean, you start to explain NOELs and LOELs.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I tried to do that several times and failed every time. But that's basically what you're saying. That there's been a lot of safety factors, if you will, built into the derivation of these numbers, taking the lowest numbers, et cetera. So I don't know how this can appear in the report, that particular section, but there's a lot of examples of these safety factors. But I would just bin them under the derivation of these values. A lot of safety factors built into them, something like that.
I like the term safety factors too. Uncertainty factors is kind of a term of art for risk assessors, but 100% in the executive summary, we can soften a lot of that language to make it more digestible and clear that these are making things safer. These assumptions are making things safer.
Sure. David?
Two things. Earlier, it was mentioned that you might include risk comparisons. I strongly advise against that. Risk communication theory is based on how risk feels to somebody, not what the numbers are, and the risk of falling on your bicycle and the risk of getting cancer from radiation feel different. Risk comparisons are really risky risk communication. I would strongly advise against communicating because emotionally they're apples and oranges. Second thought, in the, I think the previous slide, you talked about the no threshold. To the extent that you discuss dose anywhere, it's really important because people don't really understand this, that even with no threshold, linearity, from 0 and up and the line goes up, it still depends on how many aspirin you eat before the last aspirin kills you. It's still, you have to add the qualification that people think that if you're exposed to 1 part per million of a carcinogen, you get cancer. You have to express somehow in summary language The degree of risk is still dependent on the level of dose. Something as simple as that. Because when you say that there's no threshold above which a little bit of something can harm you, people say, well, shit, I don't want that to happen. 1 in a million is too high, especially if it could be me. So
Right.
that would be a second thing. And the third thing in the conversation you were having with Paul about assumptions and conservatism, worst case scenarios, we predicated this on the absolute worst case scenarios is a phrase that's been used in risk communication as a drop-in phrase for how conservative we were. We looked at what the very bad day happening again and again, the way you said it, Katie, language kind of like that. Whether you embed that in the report or not, I don't know. In the discussion of conservatism up top, that kind of language might be helpful.
Makes sense.
And I would second the suggestion that removing the comparative risk to because that's sort of risk communication. It's a little bit beyond the scope of what you're doing here.
It's not included. That was something that we just wrote in here as something we could include if
Yeah.
it was found to be helpful. And, you know, David, we understand that, you know, not comparing anything, but just for when people think about what a risk ratio is, that was the only purpose behind including it.
I understand that. And it's often used, well, to make sense of what 1 in a million and 1 in 100,000 and all of that means. But dying in a plane crash and dying in your sleep are two different things altogether. And the numbers about both talk differently to people's hearts. So again, thank you for the offer, but I would suggest not including it.
Yeah.
Happy to do so.
Okay. Last question, then we're gonna have to move on the agenda. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, I was just gonna echo what Paul and David said. I think we need some sort of more plain English accessible ways to convey the conservatism. I mean, I was just thinking when you talk about exposure, you know, something like we're assuming that people will be exposed through every pathway, through substances at every part of the site every week or every day, you know, something like that is, you know, someone can understand in real life what it means. So to the extent we could come up with language that, you know, it is intuitive experientially to people, I guess, something we would hope to get to. Yeah.
Okay, so I really want to thank you again. A tremendous piece of work, and just, you know, the teamwork in putting this together and thinking about how to communicating it just been extraordinary. I'll remind the task force, if you do have any detailed comments or even reminding people of the comments you made tonight, please send them to Chris, who'll compile them. And the one decision we are going to have to make as a task force is how and where to incorporate this report in our report, because this report with all its appendices is what, 1,300 pages? This is a big one. So I don't think it neatly fits into an appendix. So we're gonna have to talk about whether it's a text, the executive summary, and then we have a section here that Kurt and David are going to write to explain this report in our report. So, you know, it's another layer of Kurt and David will help explain the results, which will be in your report, I think. Court.
Yeah, just a quick question. In regard to follow-up and feedback for Rue, and Rue, thank you. We are looking at the slides, if I'm correct, for the first time tonight, and we have the report already in hand. Are you looking for comments on both?
I think feedback on the inclusion of the figures that displaying, you know, the risk and hazard in a graphical format, feedback on that would be great. Otherwise, there's nothing in here that's not in the report. So
Exactly. Yeah, this
Just the
derives from the report. I understand that. Okay. And then Paul, these slides reside where right now?
They reside on Ariel's machine. I don't have a copy of
Okay.
it. We don't have them. we should get copies of them, Chris. So maybe send those to Chris and he'll send them to us.
Very
Uh,
good,
To do
thank
so.
you.
They,
Yeah,
they should be in the meeting packet. So I have a few revisions in the meeting packet to make after this. So I'll add them to a revised meeting packet as well.
all right, and
May I
then
note, I'm sorry, Kurt, you done? I thought you were done.
just finally, just to echo, July 30th is when Rue wants our comments, so that's the deadline.
Yeah.
Okay,
I just wanted to reiterate for anybody who may binge watch all our meetings online, that anybody who refers to the record of this discussion understands that these slides were for the task force to understand and summarize what's in the report. The report is the document to refer to with the actual answers.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, thank you. Thank you very much. We started with some comments tonight. We'll get you more comments, but it's been great working with you.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank
For
you.
the
Thank you.
feedback.
Thanks.
Congratulations, Katie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, go all right? Everything all right?
Everyone's happy and healthy and hopefully asleep upstairs.
Yeah, you don't look too sleepy, so it's going well. Good for you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. It's another aspect of risk management, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to go through the next couple of pieces quickly, if I can. Nothing is ever quick. Let me share. So, what's in the pack? I sent out a few things. Let me first say one thing. There is this matrix I put together. The intent here is to think about the criteria for making a decision of any type. What are the things we need to know or need to be fairly confident in? So I put this together for you to think about, and what I'd like you to do in preparation for probably our next meeting is to actually fill out this matrix yourself. I'd like to see what you think about some of these, and if there's something missing here, some criteria, some consideration, and these are sort of just logical questions that we've dealt with, we've discussed under the legal banner, the needs and uses, health risks, ownership. And so if there's something missing here, please add to that. And just to think about, is the answer yes or likely, no or unlikely? Is it unknown? And if there are any notes, I think this is sort of the beginning of the end game, getting our heads around how we're going to make decisions. I thought these are probably some of the criteria that we started thinking about a long time ago. I'd like your opinions by filling this out, what you're thinking here. So I don't want to discuss this tonight. Let's try to fill this out. We'll discuss this in some detail at the next meeting. Please send these to me only. Don't copy everybody. Each one of you send and I will compile those and we'll talk about the next meeting. Pam, go ahead. You had a question?
Yeah, I just wondered, when will we be able to comment on and discuss the actual frame here? That is to say the yes, no, unknown notes part, as opposed to and which actually is relevant to the narrative statement at the left. When are you going to talk about that?
Well, okay, let's not discuss what's in the first column here. Do you guys have some alternate suggestion here of likely, unlikely, unknown? Are there any other options for sort of that you want included here?
Well, I think that if you don't have additional, well, maybe Court, would you like to take over here, please? That would be useful.
well, I'd be happy to, only in that Pam and I did discuss this today, and given the nature of the legal aspects of this, we're going to have much more in the notes column than in a declarative yes or no. Something as direct as ownership status. We would say we know what we know. We know who the holder of record is, but there's still a great deal of question as to how EPA will bring the town to the current owner to conclude negotiations were those to ever happen. So we're going to have more than a few caveats in our material, and we don't do that to confuse. We do that simply because so much of the legal is a quote, let's negotiate, comma, it depends, close quote.
Well, but this is us. This is a task force. What do we know
Mhm.
in order to make our decision? So let's take the first one. Is the current status of the site ownership known? Rita did the title search, and there's some uncertainty in that, right? You know,
Correct.
so maybe that's unknown. So it's, and then you can have no's. So I think it fits into the category of whatever, unknown or uncertain, you know, maybe uncertain. So I think everything, can the town seek and receive liability protections? And we know that's probably likely. We don't know for certain. Nothing's certain until it's negotiated, but based on what we know now, because we've done the research, I think you can probably put a check mark in one of these columns, one of these boxes. If not, just put the notes in here.
Yeah,
I'll leave it up to you.
we're very comfortable approaching it that way. We simply want to emphasize that it's, if we went beyond this task force with this chart, it would not be as simple and tidy as people might like, and we make no apologies for that.
Yeah, so in order for us to make a recommendation, I think we have to be fairly knowledgeable about this category, right? It can't all be unknown. So it's either likely, unlikely, maybe some of it's unknown. So, I think maybe at the end we won't know enough to make a recommendation. I don't think that's the case, but that's what I want to get into here. Do we know enough to make a recommendation? I'm not saying what the recommendation is, but do we know
Right.
enough?
Well, but I think it's a good exercise
Yeah.
because it will tell us how what conclusive things are, or how much things are subject to some further interpretation, and B, some further negotiation.
I mean, I think I'm concerned that a lot, at least in the legal and maybe in other areas, are going to be in the notes. And I think maybe if you had another column saying it depends, or maybe, or something, but as it reads now, it's almost too reductive for me. And I think
Well,
also,
if you don't feel comfortable filling it out, then put it in the notes. And we all have heard all the legal information, and maybe, so let's take another one. Are there acquisition pathways available for the town? Does anybody think the answer is not yes? There are pathways. We don't know what they are, right? Can acquisition terms be negotiated to the benefit of the town? We've heard that's quite possible. I don't know. Please put your own spin on this. I just want to go through the exercise, okay? And it is an exercise, Court.
Okay, just last point on this. I think I may disagree with you a little bit on this. I think it's reductive, but having said that, and I won't go farther with it, I also just have a generic point, and this is sort of coursed through all of my comments on this task force. We want to be credible, and some of this sounds almost like it's rhetorical in a sense. I mean, it seems to lean in a direction, and I just caution us because I want us to be trusted. I gather from what you're saying here, Paul, this will not be a public document. This is just a kind of really rough way to get going. Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
It's not going to go in the report.
It would be leading us in a direction if I just had one column which said yes, right? But I have a column that says no, I don't know. So this could lead in any direction, Pam. And these are sort of objective.
Okay, I'm just respectfully disagreeing a little bit and suggesting that it's a little reductive, and also suggesting that we've got to be very careful about being rhetorical. That's all, because we want to be credible. End of comment. What was saying?
Your disagreement is noted. Let's go through this and see what it turns out. Kurt.
Well, I was just going to point out, we should also consider as we go through this, the relative weight of the criteria. Not all of them are as material as other ones. So I think one of the things we can help the select board is identifying what are the real material issues that have the most significant risk And also similarly thinking about probability of occurrence. There may be things in here that are low probability, but are very material that we want to highlight that we really need to get right. So just a little more dimensionality to it than just the yes, no, and just weighing them equally.
Please take a crack at that if you want to put some weighting on it, however you want to do that. Again, this is an exercise in sort of us all kind of converging on, really, these are the questions that we posed to ourselves way back. Have we answered these? Have we not answered them? Are we comfortable moving forward? So, I mean, we have to get through these, a lot of these, before we can consider what recommendation we're going to make. I think so. So humor me and give this a shot and annotate the heck out of it, and we'll see where we come out the next meeting.
Is this
And
a,
please, if you want,
is this an invitation for us to comment on this, or is this an invitation to Kurt to do his thing? I just want to suggest you might think of adding at least another column that says maybe or it depends or something else, and and recognize that the narrative that is in the notes may be extensive.
well, I hesitate to put a comment that says it depends, because everything depends on negotiations. If you're telling me we don't know until we negotiate, that's
Right.
true. That's true. It depends on successful negotiations, but that we have to make a recommendation that has those caveats, like, let's take one. Can we negotiate, can acquisition terms be negotiated to the benefit of the town? It depends, right?
Maybe.
It depends. But what we've heard, some may say it's likely, some may say it's unlikely, but it definitely depends. There's a lot in this category that depends. I agree.
Exactly.
But if we have one category that says depends and everybody checks it off there, we're not making progress, because I think we know it depends. Depends on successful negotiations, but yes. If you want to add a column, it depends, please feel free to do that. Kurt.
Yeah, Paul, I think we've noted our concerns. And I do believe this is going to be a helpful exercise with the understanding that it's an internal document to help us. It's not something we're preparing for prime time. It's going to be embodied in other ways in our report. To that end, one, can you get a copy of this to us in Word format? I think we have it in PDF right now. And then secondly, I'm going to suggest that in the question column, that for me, I wouldn't play with your questions or edit them, but I might add one or two that come up that seem to be pertinent that I'd like you to consider adding. Is that okay?
Oh yeah, that I only left one blank in each. Let me add. I will get you a Word doc. I'll revise this, add a few more rows. I will give you a Word document, and yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And any other? Oh, Carl.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, you want us to answer this for all of these questions, not just
Yeah.
the work we worked on, is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, the purpose of the work streams is for the work stream leaders to bring the information in front of the whole task force. We have to be, equally conversant on all of these, I would hope. Although some of us have majored in some and minored in some of the others, so we have to be, to pass the comprehensive exams, you need to weigh in on all of them.
So again, for clarification, not each individual on the task force, but each of the 4 work streams will work within their work stream to answer all of these, irrespective of whether it's in our work stream or the other 3.
Well, I would hope we have 9 worksheets here. Each
Oh,
individual.
okay. That's what I need to know.
As individuals, if you want to collaborate, that's fine.
I think
I'm not wedded to an approach. I just want to make sure we've got our marching orders.
Yeah.
It might be
So,
challenging for the work streams to do it and get it done by the next meeting.
I'm sorry. Yeah, just, sit down and go through it. I don't think this is gonna be hard to do if you paid attention. And I'm not saying there's gonna be a lot of unknowns, but we'll see. Let me continue. So before I get to the outline, well, let me get to the outline first. So the outline that I put together here, it's reflective of the conversation we had before, and all these highlighted sections of things I've added. I'm going to ask you to go with this outline, and but let me quickly go through this here. Yes, we're going to have an executive summary, and yes, we're going to have a glossary and all the good stuff as a report. We're going to have an introduction introducing the whole effort, the areas of investigation, the decision factors under consideration, some version of that chart. I want to show the chart, and here are the things we've considered and the questions that we've undertaken, because those then factor into each of these areas, the issues considered, really the questions considered. We've split the legal piece into two, which is really the acquisition liability part and then the ownership part. One deals with the liability protections, the other one deals with insurance, et cetera, and ICs. There's a redundancy, you'll see, because ICs are also in 9, but I'm not going to worry about the redundancies quite yet. A section 7, which will be I guess a summary and explanation of Rue's report, plus other issues. Maybe the relative risk stuff goes in here. I'm not sure, David, you and Kurt needs to figure out what goes in here, but this is sort of, remember, the Rue report is either going to be an appendix or a separate document that we're going to refer to. So we have to explain, summarize that in here. Next section on so the reuse possibilities. I think that Matt focused our attention on the 2021 report. And I think we all should take a look at the 2021 report for some insights, things we can pull into this report. And then the town as an owner. So this is basically our findings. And each one of these has uncertainties. We ought to be, when you write these, if you don't feel comfortable with A, B, C, and D sections, just right away, I or one of the editors will end up putting it in this format, because I think that I want the report to have some structure, since we have many different writers. I think this is an important section here. This is the experiences and examples from other municipalities. Even though we've used those and those have fed into other sections, I think this is we've talked about this as a really good section, whether this involves acquisition decisions or decisions not to acquire, or institutional control management or risk management. I think there's a lot in the notes that can be summarized here. Then these last sections, I'm going to think about a little bit more. I'd like you to focus on sections 1 through 10. So we're going to get into this sections on recommendations and next steps. Okay, here's the criteria. We'll go into a little bit more detail. I'm not sure we're going to need this section because it's kind of self-evident. What are the possible outcomes? Not recommendations. The 3 possible outcomes: the town acquires the site, a private party acquires the site, or no one acquires the site. I don't even think that deserves its own section, but those are the 3 possible outcomes. Those differ than the options considered. So here, this is going to be another topic of one of our meetings. What are the various options that we are considering and making a recommendation? What does a recommendation look like? And I'm sure we thought about this. There's a recommendation, I'll call it conditional acquisition. There's a recommendation, don't make no action, no decision, wait until there's townwide planning done. There's a recommendation that the town negotiates with an EDA to acquire the site and or develop the site. And there's an option, don't acquire, allow for pass the opportunity, allow for private and governmental ownership. There may be other ones here, but I think this is, these are sort of the options that the task force will have considered. And then we will make a recommendation that we haven't decided yet. That'll be in this section here. There's a section that Pam Rockwell has started to draft. She sent several of us a section. I know that Carl and Carrie and others may take a look at this, the institutional control management plan. This section is alive if our recommendation is really to acquire, because then I think the select board would probably need some recommendation on how to manage institutional controls. I'm not sure if this section is needed if our recommendation is to pass on the site. We'll have to think about that. I think there's an important section here on risk communication, which is sort of a next step. Remember, this is recommendation and next step. So the next step beyond how to manage institutional controls is how to communicate going forward risk to the public. Because remember, the town, even if we make a recommendation to acquire, there's going to be no action for quite a while because there'll have to be negotiations and the uncertainties fleshed out. But in the meantime, there'll probably be a need to have a risk communication effort to the town. And we started to talk about that a little bit earlier, but I think this section here would be a recommendation to the select board. What does this risk recommendation effort look like? And then next steps. So these would be what are the recommended actions to the select board, the proposed timeline. You've seen those timelines that I've speculated on. What happens from October through next year, up until the SWARO comes out in 2028. What I think the select board probably needs a timeline in there, and probably needs a timeline whether or not the recommendation is to acquire, because things are going to happen in that intervening time, especially cleanup and the SWARO and the potential for development, which would be supposedly 2028, 2029. So let's go. I don't want to, I think we've been over this. I think this is a workable outline. Please feel free to adjust it as you're writing, and as you start writing as well. Any kind of high-level comments on this? Does this sound okay to start? We've been over this. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this unless there's something missing totally. Remember, we're going to be discussing this section as well as the decision criteria coming up. But I just put these in here as sort of a first crack. David.
Thank you for the chart, and thank you for this. A lot of work that helps us as exercises focus down onto what we ultimately have to decide. So first, thank you. Second, the outline, I have no qualms with the outline, except for it invites a really long report. So I would encourage us all to think about making the editor's job as easy as possible for cutting it down to what it really ought to be. So be as terse and clear and common language, as you were saying, Carl, as we can all be towards keeping it reasonable, of reasonable length. I mean, when we got the Rue report, I think a lot of us, I said, oh my God, this is monstrous. So
Yeah.
we don't want to do the same thing. So a caution, that's all.
Well, I appreciate the comment. It's true. This really shouldn't be, maybe 80 pages is ambitious, but maybe it should be under 100. And these should be summary sections, right? If you want to have details or charts, or they should go in the figures or tables or in the annex. So try to distill these down into summary sections, what we did, how we did it, what we found, what the uncertainties. I don't know how each of these sections should be, but probably 5 to 10 pages a section would be ideal, and maybe that would add up to more than 100. But we're not looking at 20 page sections. But yeah, thank you for that. And I promise this thing as a report schedule, and So let me just go through this here. So this is today. I'm not gonna ask for a motion or a vote on this, unless somebody wants to vote it down. But let's assume this, we have a working outline. The next two meetings, we have a meeting on July 30th and on August 20th. These will be task force meetings. We have our work cut out to start deliberating and discussing decision criteria and options for recommendations. That we're gonna be spending that time here. Between now and September 1st, I think we need to draft our report section. So we basically have a month and a half to draft these sections. I don't want to make it any tighter because it's summer and people are doing things, but I think, you know, you're all on top of what you've been doing. So I think we can get this done. We have a meeting on September 3rd, and I mentioned that would probably be the meeting where, based on these previous discussions, we would vote on our recommendations, you know, and we'd have a vote on that. We'd have motions, amended motion, we'd vote on the state. That's what I'm suggesting. But back to the report sections, between September 1st and September 15th, we would all take a look at all the sections, but we'd get review comments back to the section authors by mid-September. We have a meeting, which is on the schedule on September 17th, to basically discuss the report as a group, what's missing, what major problems, or so this will be a report discussion meeting. Then 2 weeks later, by the end of September, the revised report sections with graphics and tables would be submitted to the chair and the editor. Now, the editor, Skio has sent in some suggestions where they could help on the editing. I haven't engaged Skio on this yet. I don't know who the editor is going to be, but at this point, we need to start pulling the report together and editing. And so that's why we need the revised draft report sections. And I do think, by the way, we're going to be submitting a final draft to the select board, because based on their comments, we may want to reserve the opportunity to revise the report based on their comments. I think give them the opportunity. So we're going to be submitting a final draft to the select board, and this is Monday, the November 4th. So between the end of September and 2 weeks of editing, maybe that's tight, and maybe this will have to slip. I don't know. We have one final task force meeting on the 15th of October to discuss the report. You know, if everything goes smoothly, this should work, but it may not go smoothly, and we may be prepared to kind of have the schedule slip. But I want to lay out what's a realistic but probably ambitious schedule. And then finally, the final 2 weeks of August is final production, and everybody would review this report, and there might be some more comments. We might have to slip a week or two based on the final review. So, what do you think?
I don't know. It looks very tight. I'm wondering if it might make some sense to move the report section first drafts up to the middle of August to give us more time to review and comment and make revisions, you know, a little earlier, and have just create a little more slack in the schedule.
I'm certainly open to that, but I don't want to put any more burden on you guys, given where we are in the summer. You know, if
Paul, my comment might be somewhat in line with yours. In my thinking was 48 hours between the report coming in on 9/1 and the vote on 9/3 seems quite tight to me. I'd really love to digest in its entirety everything from the other three work streams. And so my thinking, I think driven by the same idea, but with a different solution than yours, was might we have a straw poll on September 3rd? Test the waters and then come back for something final, and that would make the process more accessible to the public were we to do so also.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. Yeah, my thinking was that I didn't think about this would be, there'd be a dependency, but there certainly could be. I think given the decision criteria and discussions, I had assumed we would know enough through these meetings and discussions amongst the group. We didn't have to read the report, but you're probably right. We benefit. So let's make this a straw poll.
Kurt, Carl, does that satisfy? Does that help go where you wanted us to go as well?
You're muted.
Yeah, I think that's helpful, you know, yeah.
So the suggestion of accelerating the reports to a month from now, is that, do we want not to do that? I'm okay, you know, if you can get the sections in earlier, that's fine. I just, you know, I'd rather have it out here, you know.
Share the sections as they get drafted. So
Yeah.
people have more time to review them, you know, if any of them are done early. I don't think the operation section, you'll certainly have that, you know, by the end of July, early August.
So no, this is on or before. And I'm gonna have to talk with Chris to figure out exactly how and where these sections are submitted. Do we want this on a share file? We're gonna have to get it on a share file. I'm not sure where that share file is hosted. So stay tuned on the logistic for submitting these sections. So yes, okay, we'll keep to this. We'll have this as a straw. But we will have discussed the options here on recommendations. And I would like the group to see where we are. Do we have consensus? Do we have a majority? What do we have as far as where we are? This is like I think this is a civil trial. It doesn't have
More
to,
likely than not.
yes, it doesn't have to be unanimous, but it's unless you want to make it a criminal trial. But I don't know. Let's see where we are. It's a good suggestion, Court. Gary.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo really what David had said. You know, thank you for putting all this together. Tremendous effort. You know, having chaired a prior committee and a couple of other committees, I know that you're putting a lot of time and effort into organizing all of this. But I also reiterate what David said, that I think this is going to be a very long report, and it is going to be a very ambitious timescale. So just, I don't know. I don't have suggestions on how to simplify it, but I mean, you know, 17 chapters and 80 pages, you're talking about 5-page chapters. I sympathize with Pam and Court in trying to write all of the legal information in 5 pages, but you know, I agree with Carl. You know, I think our section will be relatively easy to draft, and we may be able to do it in 5 pages and may be able to, you know, do it ahead of September 1st. So maybe we can save some space for other sectors that.
And you know, use graphics and tables that then, you know, that those, you can put a lot of information on one page that might take 10 pages of text. You know, just explaining the scenarios graphically is just.
Yeah, I'm not worried about writing our section. I'm more worried about the process of making this digestible for the public and not having a 300-page report. But I think it's all good information, and I think we're definitely going to have 300 pages of annexes. So, you know, that's, I mean, that's the classic World Bank report is, you know, 30-page report and 300 pages of annexes. And I think that can be a useful way to try and focus this.
Well, you know, and you can be sure the select board's going to read the executive summary, right? the Recreation Commission just wrote a strategic plan which had, I don't know, 300-400 pages, and select board read the executive summary. So, and they got a lot out of it. So I don't know what they're going to read, but I think this is going to be a public document, and I think the public can be very interested, as much or maybe more so, in some of the details on the select board. I don't want to prejudge who's going to be interested in what, but you're right. This is an ambitious report, but you know, it's a lot of information we have to put down in writing. So, Pam.
Yeah, I just, I wanted to echo what others have said, that I think the effort you put in, Paul, is commendable. I think it's a difficult task. And I think you've made a tremendous effort here, so I thank you for that. I also wanted to say that I think that I think brevity is really, really valuable in this. I think that the appendices are for those who want to dive deep. And I think Court and I certainly can keep ours brief. I think it'll make it easier for us, and will provide a more straightforward, plain English kind of answer to the extent that we can do that without doing violence to the complexity of the legal issues.
Yeah, all you guys have written. Well, thank you for everybody. You guys have written reports. I think in writing the sections, focus on topic sentences with explanation. I think if you structure this and put the main thought and have a small description, you'll make it very readable. I think, you know, topic sentences in a report like this are really important. That describes what's in the next section, so somebody can just read the first line and skim the rest. So I think don't bury the messages. Have the messages in each piece kind of lead the text. I think I'm not telling you something you don't know, because you've all written stuff, and some of you have written books like David Ropick there, many books. So does this feel like a book to you, David?
It feels like it could turn into one.
Do we have a publisher?
God help us if we do.
Okay, so I think we've gone through. So let me just what we're going to do the next couple of meetings is revisit these decision criteria. Just see kind of where we are on the various important points, and we're going to discuss what the various options are in our recommendations without making those recommendations. And yeah, we can start with these, and we could, you know, what are the possible recommendations, even if we don't believe in some of them, but what are the range here? So that we'll be discussing a lot sort of going forward, and yeah, I think the straw poll on September 3rd, by the time we get there, Court, I think we'll have a pretty good sense where everybody is, but we'll see. So wow, it's 8:30, and I think we've covered the agenda, unless we turn to public comments. And let me stop sharing. And Carlin Reed.
Hi,
Hi.
Carlin Reed. I'm a member of the Finance Committee, but I'm speaking on my own behalf. Paul, in your executive summary, are you going to give recommendations on what the select board should do next steps for them? You'll have a great timeline of what you've done, but another piece that's really interesting is, what's the select board going to do, or what do you think the select board should do, as far as, are you going to ask them to put this out for comment or for public comment? Are you going to ask them to present this as a warrant article for approval at town meeting, or what? Have you envisioned that type of recommendation?
Well, I envision putting next steps, but not so much in terms of where the report goes, although that's an interesting thought. You know, we're not, there's no action here that requires the town vote. This is basically a decision by the select board whether to start down a pathway. There's no financial decision here other than legal costs and So I don't know if there's a town vote required. As far as putting this out for public comment, it's a good question. I haven't thought about that and whether the select board wants to do that or not. It's kind of their report, and if they want to do that, you know, maybe Terry can give us some insight even before we write the report on where that's going. But as far as next steps, it's sort of, yes, next steps on our recommendations. Does that answer your question, Carlin?
Yes, it does. It means the ball's in your court now. Thank you.
Any other comments? Matt, thank you for sending me your thoughts on help. I'll get back to you on that. So we will need some help from Skio and kind of pulling things together here. But you kind of heard where we are, so I'll be getting back to you, Matt. Any other comments, Matt, Kara? Okay, so our next meeting is, I should know, is July 30th, so in 2 weeks. Any final comments, or should we adjourn? I think we should adjourn.
Thank you very much. I would echo everybody's thanks for getting us this far, this effectively. Thank you.
Well, I'm transferring the heavy load now to you guys.
Well, we wouldn't be accepting it if we didn't have some confidence that we had a good plan.
Okay. Great. Okay, meeting is adjourned, and see you in a couple of weeks.